Hello. Hello. Yeah. So let's start. So today we are going to have our panel, career paths after PhD, opportunities and challenges. So we have our panel. So you all know the panel. So I'm not going to introduce them again. Probably I will start with the title of the panel. So what are the career paths we have after we finish our PhD? So Marc.
Academia. No. What should I say? What career paths do we have? So in the CT that I run, we have got 4 designated career paths that we try to tailor our training to. People in the CT, please remind me what they are. No, entrepreneurship is one of them. Academia is one of them. Engineer is one of them. And I forgot how we called it. Not administrative. Executive, exactly. So those were the 4 we had designated, and we're trying to do some training around, while the executive one is sort of a bit of the dirty child. Well, we're not entirely sure what it actually really means, if I'm honest. So I would probably say we have 3.5 that we're tackling in there, because it's very close to the entrepreneurship. And so that's obviously the sort of main things. Well, engineering covers the big D in R&D, I would say, and academic covers the big R with maybe a bit of D. And then, following examples like Zaki, so we've got a couple of these examples also where I see like people sometimes, pick up their PhD topic and start their own business. So these are, I would say, the main ones, but you can also, as we've learned, and we don't train anyone for it, but you can end up as funding bodies as well. and I would rather call it overall policy, which is something that I found that we've somewhat underexplored when I look at our own sort of career path training. There's very little training, and we've also, in the session that we had with the CDT today, it was shown also the biggest lack of awareness is around policy and regulation. And that maybe is a sort of career path that one could explore a bit more.
Would you like to add anything? Anyone?
Quickly, has anyone here who's doing PhD or postdoc applied for any industry roles at any point?
Industry role?
Yeah.
Yes.
For me, when I tried applying, I was always called like you're overqualified for the role. So that is the first thing you got to be prepared about, and try to upsell yourself than actually applying for something for which a fresh graduate, either undergrad or master's, can apply. So showcase your skills that I'm much more than that. So that is my piece of advice.
Just going to take a different take on it. It also depends on what you're exposed to in your institution and what you're prepared to do. Sometimes we learn by example. When I was finishing my PhD, the people who graduated from my university went 2 pathways, either Google, Facebook, big companies moved to San Francisco, basically, or they directly applied to academia for assistant professorship roles. And those were the 2 kind of acceptable options that we were prepared for, basically. When I joined Deutsche Telekom Labs, we were given 3 pathways after the 6th year. We were said, we give you a 6-year contract, but after this, we expect you to be a professor in academia or have your own spin-off startup or be part of Deutsche Telekom. So it really sometimes is almost pushed where you are or what you are prepared for as well.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I wanted to also say, like, one of the reasons that I founded TouchLab and stayed in Scotland was also because there was a very clear brain drain. Like, people were robotics has been excellent in Edinburgh for a very long time. A lot of people don't know that, but everybody was leaving. Like, they were going to companies down south, or, as you said, to Silicon Valley. So there was no really, like, I don't know, Boston Dynamics level robotics company around, and it was pretty obvious that, there was a surplus of people being trained and leaving. So if somebody could create that, that would offer a new path, local pathway as well for those people.
Good. Yeah.
Only thing to add upon the brain drain side of things is this came up in Marc's talk, and now Zaki is mentioning as well, and I have noticed quite a lot of that as well. One thing I was strongly proposing in lots of UK-wide conversations is European Robotics Forum, which is ERF, a flagship conference of EU robotics. That happened in Odense in 2023. And there is a nice ecosystem of, startup ecosystem of robotics that came up and was set up in Odense, which is an example for all of us to have a look and see how the effort has been made there to establish such ecosystem where researchers from universities can transition into that space. So that is something we need to think about within UK and see how we can establish something like that.
Thank you. So within the audience, anyone would like to add anything? No? Yes?
Thank you for the talk. I just have a question about, is it possible for someone to work in academia and industry at the same time?
With very special contracts, I think you can manage that. For example, with the Deutsche Telekom, the labs were established by investing in professors who have chairs in the universities, and they also had presence in Deutsche Telekom. But those positions needed to be opened by the industry itself, which enabled professors to be part of that kind of system. That's one way I know of. And I know I have a PhD student, for instance, who is part-time PhD student who's in the industry, director in UBS, but doing a PhD very related to what he's working on because he thinks there is research value in what he does as well. So that is happening with the support of the company. The company is funding his PhD. So those are possible.
I know I've seen a lot of examples where professors or medium senior academics then go onto this sort of part-time being engaged in a company, either their own or they are working with one of the big ones, be it the Googles, Amazon, robotics, etc. And initially start this as a sort of part-time engagement, and then they crank it up, and they crank it up, and then they're gone. I've seen very few returning. I don't know if people have other experiences, but it seems to be almost the moment they go 20%, next year they go 40%, and then they're gone. At least that's what I've experienced a number of times.
I was going to second that briefly, if that's okay. Yeah, we started when the pandemic hit and we had to raise money for the X Prize, and basically we had to start paying for the time of the academics who were involved, find a way to pay for them. We did that through a consultancy arrangement with the university, right? And in the end, the person who ran the Edinburgh Base Centre lab, so that's the lab that has the only NASA Valkyrie robot in Europe, he ended up joining us full time after that. So again, it's like, it's kind of the same thing.
Seems to be a one-way street in most cases, weirdly.
For Cigdem, it was not that. So you were in the industry, but you did come back.
I want to give example outside my own as well. I've seen it happen to others. I had a professor, Steve Laval, who was one of the first researchers in Oculus, before Oculus was Oculus, and sold to Facebook. And he and his wife were the first kind of researchers that their algorithms got implemented. Then the company sold, they made a huge amount of money. They went back to the university, created a new AR/VR course, wrote a few books, and now I think he's a professor in Finland.
So there are examples in both directions, right?
Yeah, so exactly. I think Marc already mentioned about Amazons and the like. So a couple of examples of people that I know. Ingmar Posner, who's Oxford Robotics Institute, he's an Amazon fellow, and Russ Dedrick, who's from MIT. He's a Toyota Research Institute fellow. So these are examples at the senior level, but I don't know how whether it fits into the question that you're asking, but Innovate UK facilitates something called KTPs, Knowledge Transfer Partnerships, where a researcher can work in industry if they have a problem where their expertise fits in for a certain period of time. And there is a very likely chance of that person being absorbed into the company towards the end of the KTP. Although in the organizations that I worked, KTP never worked in their favor, so they were shying away from it. I don't know the reason exactly because I wasn't directly involved. That is another route for early stage to explore.
Thank you. So would you like to add anything? Oh, you're good. Okay. Anyone else would like to add anything at this point?
I think there are some other routes as well for industries. On the teaching side, the Royal Academy of Engineering run a scheme where they'll pay an industrialist, with grey hair, to come back into academia to help with teaching. So that's a kind of a visiting professor scheme that works quite well. And also things like EPSRC have prosperity partnerships programs where companies and universities link together to try and tackle a problem. And I think then that allows the industry and the academia to work closely together. So there are a few schemes around there.
And both applies to you as well, right? So you did them. Yeah, so you did those sort of teaching as well, right? You are in industry and then you were Royal Academy of Engineering Fellow and then in Imperial College,
Yes, so I've done one of the visiting professor schemes, and and actually, do you know what? I joined it because I wanted to do a bit more research with the university.
Yeah.
But actually, when I got in there and they introduced me to some of the teaching and stuff, I really got into the teaching. So that was quite a nice benefit. Yeah.
Good. Yes, Caspar.
Can I throw it? Yeah.
So, thanks. So just to add to it, there is a colleague, Nicolas Rojas. He was at Imperial College London. Then he was part-time Amazon, I believe. And now he's full-time at Boston Dynamics and their new AI institute. So there are ways of moving out of academia into industry. But I think that is only preserved for really the top people. Because I think you have to really convince industry that you are up to it to help with their developments.
Yeah, thank you. So now, so you have talked about different paths, right? So if a PhD student who is now in their second year or first year, so if he wants to be academic at the end, in few years after his PhD. So how should he prepare himself or herself from his starting of your PhD study?
You meant to stay in academia?
Yes, stay in the academia.
So that means I need to answer this. Oh, okay. Okay. Right. So obviously, if you want to have an academic position, you need to publish. Right. That's just the sort of baseline expectation. I think that needs to be done these days. We can question whether that is sufficient and still the right approach, but I would say that is something that people need to focus on to get out there and publish in decent places. That probably is not sufficient in that sense in its own right, because what you really must do is being extremely passionate and willing to work in academia, I would say, because let's be honest, the money can't be the pull factor to stay in academia, right? If you are skilled to do a PhD, the money is somewhere else, I would say. I think what academia still offers is some good degree of freedom to do what you are really passionate about, with a good deal of security, roughly right? So it is somewhere in between, I would say. It's not as crazy as going completely independent, starting your own company, being an entrepreneur, but it's also not working in a company and being very much directed. So that's a sort of decent middle ground. That's how I see it, what academia can offer. And I said, right, it's almost like being independent, but with a strong franchise around you, right? You don't have to do everything for yourself. You don't have to, learn to be a CEO. You've got somebody else who can help you with that, for instance. So that's a bit the view. And for that, then of course, to really, what is then really important, and what you would, when you get to your first lecturer job interview or your postdoc interview, is actually, besides the one specific thing in your PhD you have done, what's your additional network? Where you're going to go next? What have you learned besides that? Because it is relatively unlikely that they are really specifically only interested in your very niche problem you have done. So that's why I said also before, the network is really important. So when I did my interview here, I had this, I said like, I have a project idea. I will work on a first proposal with these guys. That was absolutely a door opener. So when I'm starting thinking, all right, what am I going to do next? And with whom I want to do this? That's, I think, quite important.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just to add, I think things got more difficult from when I graduated to now. So when I graduated in 2007, you could go from a PhD and apply directly to a professorship, assistant professorship job. What I'm observing now, that people have to go a few postdocs before they can get a full-time, lectureship, basically, a permanent contract. And what we're looking, of course, we're looking at research vision, but it's also about fit. Where you're applying, are you a good fit? Are you filling a gap? And in addition to that, is your research overlapping to some extent with others so that you can work with them? Can people imagine that they can work with you? This is a colleague next door, and this will be the next project I would do with them if they join us. Them imagining that will probably be a good thing. So whenever you're applying to a place, you probably would like to look at what's the gap, and are you filling that gap, and are you also kind of overlapping with their research interests? That's the one thing that I would look at. The other thing that I would look into is getting as much research experience in different places as possible, observing different research cultures in different labs, creating those networks, trying to get even though small funding, showing that you had some experience in getting funding, experience in supervision, undergrad, masters, just showing that you have mentored younger people into research. Also, any additional, even though small teaching experience, so that people, when interviewing you, they could imagine, oh, this is the person who could do this for us next year when they come in. So that's what I would advise.
Supervision, really important. Yeah. Get involved in actually guiding others in doing your PhD.
Yeah, essentially both of you are saying build a portfolio of things other than just your research. Yeah, good.
Anything else? No? Okay, so so we have spoken about various career paths, right? So why would someone want to become an academic? What could be the motivation? What could be the motivation for becoming an entrepreneur or joining an industry? So, what are the pros and cons? Can you highlight them of being in an academic career or other career options you mentioned?
Oh, sure. I can start from the entrepreneurial perspective, coming from the academic perspective. So I was very lucky. I had a good supervisor in the end, and he offered me a postdoc, and I said, maybe, but let me just see what happens with this business competition and in case it would fund our X Prize efforts. And then, of course, that came through, and I said, sorry, I won't do it. But I think in both academia and the entrepreneurial journey, you have to be extremely motivated, intrinsically motivated by the problem. I don't think it's going to work out otherwise. And I mean this because there's been a study of entrepreneurs in terms of how many hours, how many sleepless nights, constant weekend work you have to put in to get anywhere. because of fierce competition. In the end, you get paid on average the exact same amount per hour than most other people. So you're just kind of distributing it in a different way. So I'm just saying this because I think that if you know, the remuneration is a very important aspect to your career. I always joke about this. I said I would have gone to a career in banking. They would love engineers in London. You know, our investors would hire me to do their due diligence, but I'm not there doing that for them because I'm passionate about a problem. I think academia is quite similar. So.
Yeah, in my case, I think I shared a little bit in my presentation as well. So it's all about what is motivating for you. That decides what's the next step in your career. In my case, I picked up research to stay in research and then move into academia because in my opinion at that point, academic career would give me the flexibility to spend time with children. There'll be enough holidays aligning with the holidays of their schools. So that was my motivation as well to go into academia, but I didn't. The reason why is towards the end of my PhD, I've been going to conferences, presenting, publishing in journals, but end of it, what I saw is it's not translating into something that is useful into the society. So that is my motivation factor as to what can I do within my own limit to bring those technologies, brilliant ones in the research labs, into the commercial space. How can I help do that? So that was my motivation to go into the industry. So, yeah.
If I can just very briefly second that, because I completely agree. I think there's a slower path if you stay in academia. It's about if you want to accelerate your technology readiness level and have impact. For example, if I was to stay in academia, the time it would take me to form a group of 10 full-time people to just 100% focus on a problem, many of which have doctorates, it would take far longer to do that in academia. So
I need to defend academia here a little bit, because I think that just to be clear about impact, and that's one of the main, for me, really exciting bits about academia is the sheer amount of people that you actually are working with, that you are hopefully positively influencing. The biggest impact in academia these days still is on people, is not, in my view, on technology. Because that's what I put also these photos on my last slide. In the end, the biggest things I'm proud of is some of those people that came out of the stuff. And I need to say, I had my first academic grandchild. What is that? A PhD student of mine who became an academic, and I met their first PhD student. Right? In a way, it sounds mundane, but I thought that was a really inspiring moment. And what were they doing? Yes, they were actually doing stuff we started thinking about back in the days about specific aspects of human robot interaction, etc. I think that is an important impact, and we shouldn't undervalue that. And it's also one of the things that I really find exciting. I have to say, some students are really annoying, but that you have got the opportunity to speak with so many people and get so many inputs and ideas from them is still one of the most rewarding things of that job, I would say. And yes, I fully agree with the sort of, I want to make sure that my technology has impact on society. And that's something that, of course, partially policy-driven these days. You know, you can't really win any grants if you don't show clear pathways to impact, even if it's called differently these days. But that's something that I think one can also do from this role, from this freedom that an academic has. I really enjoy not being constantly bound by IP agreements, that I can put stuff on GitHub and publish it and see that it's cloned by so many, or it's forked by so many people. That is actual technological impact that often you find difficult when you talk to investors who stop you from doing that. And that freedom that needs to be cherished, I think, to some extent.
No, totally agree. I mean, investors want to make revenue for the company at the end of the day. You can be an entrepreneur without investors, but if you have investors, you're going to have to think about money as well. And frankly, none of us companies could hire anyone if we didn't have the academic institutions and the talent being built up. At the end of the day, we all came from there as well, so we have to acknowledge that.
I think it's, that's what I'm saying. I think spin-outs or, business is not the only way how we have technological impact. I think we've seen this. I mean, most of these companies' success is built on permissive open source software.
Yeah. Anyone would like to add anything on that? Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. As mentioned, currently for academia position is quite competitive. So, for example, one just graduated from university usually need to have 2 or 3 postdoc positions, and then looking forward to a lecturer position. So, do you have some recommendations for those early stage young researchers how to choose postdocs? For example, should one stay in the same PhD subject, or should one switch the subject to a bit different? For example, if one doing computer science and reinforcement learning in PhD, should he or she switch to like hardware robotics? So then he will know a broader range of research works. So how to balance this kind of topic change?
I want to say what I would value is that there's some sort of red thread running through what you're doing. Right? That doesn't mean that you do deep reinforcement learning for your PhD and your first postdoc and your second postdoc, right? Yeah. But you want to be able to tell a story, why you were excited about doing this. You don't want to look erratic, I would say, right? So for instance, if you can tell the story, I've done reinforcement learning in simulation, but then I really wanted to kind of do it in real world, which is why I started looking for a postdoc to work with actual real robot, and we're looking for a lab that works really in real robots. That's an absolutely compelling story to tell. But I would say it is worthwhile having that. Now, what I wanted to say, you mentioned this as well, you said it, I think, right? That there's now people doing 2, 3 postdocs. Yeah, it's not a good trend, I think. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the UK academic system was that there is junior, open-ended academic positions, right? That's in other countries. Something that was hardly known at all. So I don't quite know exactly why we have got the trend that people tend to do 3 postdocs or something like this. I don't think it's always, you said it's very competitive, but if I look around, so even in this financially struggled times for the UK higher education sector, there is actually quite a number of institutions that are hiring also academic positions. And I've seen lots of good people that had really good publication track record, excellent PhD, going straight into some of these jobs, maybe not in the top 10 universities. So maybe now I'm going to speak a little bit, being honest about, Lincoln being a sort of mid-league university, if you want to call it like that. But we've had, that's something that is really important for us also to thrive, where young talent coming from PhDs, with, you could argue, limited experience, but join that and add something new. Our problem is then obviously from such a university retention, because the moment they are good, they are being snatched up by some other universities and get some offers and are being, headhunted. But so you don't. I think if I may make a case here for the UK academic sector, that's where it's good, right? You can progress. You can go into. It's a relatively low entry into the actually academic sector. In that sense, you can start being a lecturer relatively young. And that's not the end of it, right? You can work through and go to this place, to this place. You can work up through towards better labs if you want, or you work up as to better titles. And that's a relatively good and unique system. We don't have this sort of this obsession about tenure, for instance, as we have in other places in the world.
A very good question. Should I stick to the same subject, try to change? The way I tried to do it was you're hired into a project as a postdoc, and you're hired because your PhD is somewhat relevant, and they believe that you can carry out that research because it's linked. So there must be a link somewhere that the person who's hiring you believes you that you're going to be finishing that project in 1 to 2 years. What I try to do is I try to engage with other researchers in the same lab, try to see what they're working on, is there a collaboration possibility? The first time I was a postdoc at INRIA, I was the reason why the two researchers collaborated in the first place, because they never worked on a paper before. We started discussing things during lunch, and eventually an idea emerged, and we did several publications based on that idea. So those little things, little networking, lunch networking, and etc., actually can go a long way to do various different stuff. And that's how you start diversifying and looking into what other people might be doing. Not necessarily too different, but like a little bit of a side pathway that could, if you want, can become a bigger pathway. So that's how I navigated this challenge of trying to diversify and broaden my research area so that I'm not seen as a niche researcher on a particular very small subject. And I recommend the same, because otherwise it's kind of challenging to convince people to hire you on something completely different if your PhD or any other research is very different, basically.
Yeah, so just to respond also to the question, so I agree there should be some kind of thread there, but maybe also take it as an opportunity to see where your passion is. Maybe in your PhD you liked it a lot and you want to continue there, fine, but maybe you want to try something else. And then if you are in the good situation to have multiple offers, maybe pick the one that is, closest to your heart, possibly slightly away from what you have done beforehand, but something you want to learn and want to go deeper into. The other thing I want to add is you can also create your own opportunities. So while you do your research as a PhD student or as a postdoc, make sure you publish. You have high quality journal papers out there, because then you will be, on top of all your other competitors wanting to have the same kind of job.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to do? Okay, yeah. Anima?
Hi, my question is for Dr. Radhika. You mentioned that you chose not to work in academia just because you wanted to stay close to your children, and you brought academic experience and progression into industrial labs. So my question is that when you did this, did you experience a work-life balance?
Yeah, I wanted to stay in academia because I wanted to spend more time with kids, which I didn't do. So always there is a situation where you have to balance and then see where you have to take a back seat sometimes. And again, I say the same thing, don't regret for doing that. You will always find opportunities where you can pick up new things later, and whatever you do while you are having a period of lull will come in handy during those times. So I did try going back into industry just before when I was applying for the research opportunities. I was interviewing and it was taking time. So then I thought, okay, maybe if there is a big gap of 3 to 4 years with kids, is that becoming a problem for me? Can I go back? So in industry, straight away I was accepted. I tried going back. I think I barely worked for 3 to 4 months. And I had to start at 6:30 in the morning and used to come back only at 7:30. And the kids were in the nursery. So I didn't understand why I was doing that. So I decided then that this is not the way. I'm not enjoying whatever I'm doing. So always take help from your partner or your extended family and see where you can balance it. There are some peak periods where you need to do focused work, and other areas, other times when you can rest a bit and spend time. So yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned 7:30 to 7:30 in the UK.
Not here. I went back to India 7:30 and to 7:30, and still I was unable to meet the number of hours that others were putting in. Yeah.
Yeah. Cigdem.
I just wanted to say that I had my only child while I was in the industry. They have a better parental leave package. Basically, they pay a lot longer for the time you're off. But I was in a very lucky situation where, although I was the only woman in at my level in my group for that time, all my directors had children, and they were very involved parents, fathers. So when I came back, I negotiated reduced hours as well. I came back for 4 days. And it was before COVID, but I also negotiated 1 day working from home. Now it's much more acceptable to work from home. So those things are now, just to give you an industry perspective, this is a small company, but still those things were becoming more acceptable. Though now with the reduced hours and etc., you might think that you're slowing down a little bit, you know, and you have to somewhat accept that the pace got slower because you have children, but there is a possibility to always get back and increase your hours and find that balance. And I say, don't regret, basically, the time you had to take off.
I'm just going to add, because I got 2 children and got them relatively late, because through this academic, two-body problem also in principle that one has, when your partner is also in academia, the time never feels right, and it will never feel right. You must make it right. It's important for children, I think.
Zaki.
It's one of those things where we're glad we eventually said, let's not worry about it anymore. It'll be fine eventually. And that's somehow an attitude one has to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how well placed I am as a man to give advice on this, but I don't have any children, but I employ people who have children. So, but this is more from a small company perspective, at least in our startup. It's very much about company culture, but we try to be very, very flexible. And I think there's a lot more flexibility these days, especially after the pandemic, than there used to be. I'm sure Shadow had probably quite a good culture with this, but yeah, we've had to, some of my teammates have recently have children, and we had to, try and find a good kind of flexible hybrid working environment. We even got a cot inside one of the meeting rooms in the office, and they could bring their kids with them to work and stuff, and that helped.
So my next question is, does academia have these kind of opportunities? Like you mentioned, that in your company you have this kind of flexibility that you can bring children and work. Does academic environment have these opportunities for the teaching staff or the research faculty?
Cigdem, maybe.
Or as a postdoc, you can say.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot. There's an Athenes One initiative. It's about gender equality in STEM subjects, and further, it started with STEM. So the universities are more and more aware of creating environments for people who have caring responsibilities in general, It is dictated by your culture in the department as well. For instance, we pay attention to, when assigning teaching responsibilities, to limit that to certain hours so that it doesn't interfere with, leaving children to school or children pickup times, and you are considerate about other things where the department meetings happen, that they can be also remotely attended, and etc. So we become a lot more thoughtful about catering to different needs. And I think it's going in the very much right direction, very positive direction. In terms of other things, one of the good things about academia is you also are responsible of dictating how big your workload is. It's a bit self-driven, right? And you define your hours as well, working hours, and everybody kind of finds their comfortable spot.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's the working time is really flexible, right? That's what we enjoy. That's also what and I enjoy that. We can always make that work, right? It's no problem in most cases if I just leave for 2-3 hours to take over some care responsibility when she has to teach, or vice versa. So the flexibility is there, and of course now generally working from home, etc., is all much easier. But it I agree, it often very much depends on the department and the heads of and the leadership of that department. I've heard horror stories and absolute exemplary, really supportive stories. And I've experienced both of them as well. So it unfortunately often depends on that, how they really implement what often is good strategies from universities, as we are committed to do X. It then depends on the implementation on the ground, where it really makes a difference. And we've seen really good examples of that.
Thank you. Any further question? Huda.
Thank you everyone. Is it possible for the conferences to have some childcare facilities so that the female researchers can attend without thinking about their child? And especially if we're going to international conferences and they can have some kind of facilities, they can have keep their child for the whole day. And you need to pay as well. So if the conferences have the facilities.
I'm proud to say we had that for ECMR 2015 in Lincoln.
I think more conferences, at least the ones that are in my field, are starting to introduce that. I know some of the ACM conferences are giving childcare support in the premises, and this is becoming much more accepted or thought about, let me say, not accepted but thought about by the conference organizers. I've also observed it in IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force. They have childcare support as well. One of the things that we can do is, if we see certain things lacking in the organizations that we publish, present, we should bring it up with the organizers and be that change, basically.
I'm just going to add, I was on the organization committee for an HRI conference where we actually wanted to do that, and there's a lot of effort up front to organize it, and you don't know the demand. And there was a lot of effort in that sense wasted because, it wasn't, in the end, nobody took up the offer.
So nobody?
Nobody took up the offer. We kind of advertised everything, but nobody was there who took it up. There was one person who brought their child, but she said, I'm going to take him with me. I don't want to put them somewhere in a nursery, in a care facility that we had a contract with. So I'm just saying it's great to do this, but we really need to also make sure that there is demand for it. And maybe it needs to be more common than to say, we can do this.
If one of the conferences try to make it, I think others will follow it as well.
Yeah. Well, it's always the thing, right? Demand regulates the offers.
Kasper, would you like to add anything? Yeah, of course. Huda.
To answer your question, actually, from my knowledge, so basically we organize the TAROS, right? Don't forget, there is the information contact the organization committee. Anything you need, you contact them. They definitely will try their best to accommodate, especially like a conference like this. We are not the large-scale ones, but I also aware, large like the IEEE, some of the flagship conference, they provide that, because my wife also in academia, they even say 3 days, 4 days, depending on how old your children are, they will just either childminder or some area for like soft play or like the play yard for these kids. For our conference, you may see we have I believe probably till now is the youngest attendee to TAROS. That is 1 month or 2 months years old.
3 months.
Yeah, it's from Helen. She's not here, but as organizer, we promise, I think for the future TAROS, we will also in the steering committee will guarantee if you have this kind of special needs, we do our best to accommodate. This is what we can promise from TAROS, not from others, but yeah.
Kasper, if you would like to add anything on based on your experience.
I think we had a good discussion, and I don't have any other points.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So just tying in with the same conversation, but linking back to the question about the sort of snowballing postdoc situation. I think what we've discussed so far is choosing when to have children, but you're on some sort of permanent position. But with the sort of snowballing postdoc problem, you're on a fixed-term contract. So I would like, both from the industry and the academic perspective, if someone is on a fixed-term contract for, say, 2 years,
but they have a child. What is the perspective or the impression of that from your side?
I have never been in that position, and I have to say I delayed having children for a long time because of two-body problem. We weren't too sure where we were settling. We weren't too sure how long we were going to stay anywhere. So yes, we made that decision. You've talked about regrets. I don't regret it, but thinking again, probably I would just go with the flow and see what happens. You have to look at your contracts. I think different institutions have different takes on this about freezing the contract. If it's project-based, they would have to replace the person to do the project, but then some institutions have guarantees to come back to a similar position. If you're doing your PhD, the PhD clock freezes in certain institutions, and there are different ways that leave is represented. So you will have to really look at the institution and what are their policies when it comes to parental leave in those type of contracts. And every institution has some kind of policy. Now, how much that covers in terms of coming to an exactly the same position will depend on the situation you're in.
I'm just going to add that in some respects during a PhD, if you are on a stipend, for instance, it's often easier, I would say, than it is in a postdoc. I'm going to hand over to a funding body representative in a second, because I would say this is not so much a problem of the institutions, it is much more a problem of the funding bodies that often fund these 2-3 year short-term projects, which of course then end, and then that pot of money is gone. And you will find in most of these research contracts on postdocs that there is a clause that that this is tied to this project, and therefore it is not easily replaced afterwards. And we've had quite some discussion with UKI around that. With PhD studentships, it's usually easier. You can actually pause them, you can go on maternity leave, and the support has improved, I would say, recently in that regard. For this short-term research projects that postdocs are often on, I think the problem is more severe in that sense.
Radhika.
I don't know what ARIA's policies are. At least being new, I haven't checked that, and maybe being not in a need, I didn't focus on it in my own contract. But commenting from the industry background, most of the employment contracts, after the probation, you're eligible for the full package of paternity or parental leave, whatever you get as part of it. It's just finishing up that probation period to be able to. People usually wait because they can accrue some leave on top of whatever the amount of break that is given. I see some European countries being really flexible about giving the equal amount of maternity and paternity breaks, which is nice for UK to implement at some point. Don't know who will be the policy maker for that, but apologies that I don't know about how things are from the funding body perspective. So,
would you like to add anything? Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
I could add a small thing from a small company, because it's a bit different to all of these other ones, whether or not you consider working for a small company. But usually in startups, especially at the very early stages, before any investment rounds, before a lot of clients, the policies do tend to be quite bad at the beginning, mainly because the company can't afford to lose any staff. And it will mostly tie into responsibilities. So, which comes back to this PhD thing. It depends how much responsibility is on your shoulders, how much often flexibility you might have. We definitely tried to have pretty good policies for startups, but we know that we couldn't match the academic policies yet. Maybe at some point, but usually, that's the case. So.
Thank you.
Yes, Ming.
Following that question, for the startups, your investors, they have this kind of constraint on you as like the CEO or CTO of the startup. Do you have this kind of?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and that is a very that will be a very individual question depending on the company, because it depends on the amount of control that the investors have. Usually that the amount of voting rights that investors have are directly proportional to their ownership in the company. So if the investors own more than 50% of the company, then they definitely will have a huge say in this. But even in other companies, like, for example, in my case, I have to ask for consent for certain things. So our investors want us to have good policies because it attracts talent, frankly. And that is very beneficial for a company. You know, smart people want to be treated well.
Yeah.
But yes, they do have a say. And I would say earlier stage, less experienced investors often tend to think about a quick buck first and not the longer term impact that might have on an organization.
Good, good. Any further question from anyone? Yeah, if not, so there was a suggestion that if you are in academia, you have more time for your children. Is it true?
I don't know, at least that's how I assume, because you have this, at least you have time that aligns with the school breaks.
Okay.
That's what was my assumption, and wanted to go into academia because I can be with them in the summer break, in like Easter break, and then we can do exciting things. Don't know if I was wrong though.
No, you brought your daughter here, right? Because she's off school. No.
I don't know if it is more time, but you have the flexibility to miss less. Okay. So there's a school play in the middle of the day, and you have no teaching. I would just go, basically. And then continue my research in the evening when my child is sleeping, right? It's a choice. So that flexibility, so of course, we have student-facing hours where there's no negotiation, right? I have to be in that classroom, I have to be teaching, and other type of commitments. But apart from that, I think that flexibility allows you to be more present in the hours that your child wants to see you present, basically.
I'm just going to add, so yes, you have this great flexibility, but then there's also these things where you are asked to travel to London and sit on a panel for where your partner says, "Why are you gone again for 3 weeks, for 3 days, whatever." So I think that comes also with academia. It's great flexibility, which is part of that, but the whole timing. I mean, I meet with my partner at least once a week, where we make a schedule for the next week. Who's doing what when, right? And I think that's we have a shared calendar to organize this stuff. And that's what comes with flexibility. I just can't say, I'm away from 9 to 5. You take care, right? I'm at work. No, it's flexible. So there's lots of negotiations. I'll take my ticket today, and I tell you, I pay a price for being here.
Okay.
So I would just say as well, I mean, I definitely think most of the time academia has this is far better, like pensions and policies for this are just a lot better. It's a non-profit, you know. It doesn't have the same kind of constraints necessarily. So for me, I'll be completely honest, like the first time I ever thought about policies was many years into the company. We were like, you know, it wasn't even in our head, like, are we going to succeed as a company, let alone, you know, thinking about employees having children and the fact that everybody might have children at some point. So when we got our latest investment round, which is over 2 years ago now, with a more mature investor like Octopus Energy, they actually came in, and before they were investing, they were like, okay, we need to go through all your policies. What are your policies for this? And we're like, nobody has children yet. Like, we haven't even thought of it. There are no policies. So first of all, we did that. But then actually, shortly after that, we end up hiring this great colleague of ours who's leading the robotics side, Vlad. He used to run the lab in Edinburgh with NASA Valkyrie. And his, I didn't know what the situation was at the time, but this was a really important point for him. So what I would say is, and we had a long discussion with him, and we actually modified some of the policies to make them more amenable to him. This is not anything you can do with a big organization, but this is something I just want everybody to keep in mind. If you're joining startups, you might have an opportunity to actually instantly, directly influence the policy, which could be quite good.
Yeah, Rob.
As one of the oldest people in the room. So for me, I call it the kind of Rob cosign. So when I started my career, when I was young, I was, super keen, made, lots of hours, trying to make as much contribution as I could to the company. I was working in the aerospace company. And then when I had children, I decided, well, actually, I'm not going to give the company that much. I'm going to do my work, but I'm not going to put the extra hours and things in and try and get extra promotions and extra responsibilities. So that's the going down in the cosign. And then when the kids were older, I had a bit more time, and now they've left home. So I'm now actually doing more work again. So that's my cosign kind of look at contributions and stuff.
Thank you. So we are towards the end of the panel discussion. So before we end, I'd like to have the final thoughts from each of you regarding the career and any advice, you would like to give to the early career researchers.
I'll try and start this off. I would always encourage, I think, people to do things that they won't regret. So I think that's been a general theme of all the talks, and no matter what your path is in life, is just don't like if you make a decision, even if it has risk involved in that decision, if it's something that you could regret later not having made or not having explored that path, that's what I would say. Then I would say take it, because you don't want to think what if. That's the thing you don't want to. If you go and explore a path and you fail, you'll have the answer to your question. You'll have tested your hypothesis, and that's science. So that's the best way. But that's my key advice.
Thank you, Cigdem.
I think what I've been doing is trying to detect if I am operating in a comfort zone and getting too comfortable and not learning. And whenever I detected that, I kind of made a shift. It might work for some, it may not work for others, but I would just say have that awareness of whether things are working in the way you would like them to work, and do not hesitate to push for a change if it's not. Not everything needs to go always the way you imagine, but I feel like when you ask me whether I have regrets, and I said no, because I look at them as lessons learned. I'm a different person because of those experiences. I probably do a few things differently, and I wouldn't approach things this way if I hadn't had those experiences. So I would recommend looking at everything as a learning opportunity, basically.
Thank you. Radhika?
In my case, the best advice is don't do anything for the sake of ticking that box. Do it if you like to do it. So I remember myself when I was applying for jobs or applying for research opportunities, people were saying to me that you should show different things that you need to do. At that point, like I said, I was only focused on my academics, didn't have anything else. So I was just, what should I put in? Should I put book reading, walking? What should I put in that? So later on, slowly, I built my passion into, I started running, and then I started hiking, which I enjoyed. And then I started doing activities in my voluntary roles, which was almost like taking time off from my personal time, but they were, in fact, giving me back the soft skills that I needed, which helped me in my job. So if you're looking for the next opportunity, or if you're looking for progressing, don't try to do things where you're ticking that box. Make sure you're doing things which are helping you grow as an all-rounded individual. That'll take you a long way.
Thank you. Marc?
Of course. Left with little to say. That's always the problem when you're the last one. One thing, don't worry. No, honestly, what I mean by that is, if you are a PhD student in this area where there's, it's part of the future, you will have lots of opportunities. So it is absolutely fine also to say no to some opportunities, to some investors because they don't have the right sort of attitude, to some of your supervisors who come up with an idea that was probably cool 20 years ago, and don't just do it, right? So because you have the right to say no to a lot of things, which is important to often also do, I would say. And what I mean with don't worry is, I mean, I hear a lot of, should I have children? Should I take this job, or does it look too erratic or whatever? In the end, it is your journey, and that you are in this area and you're doing a PhD or you're already in a academic career makes you already stand out, and you'll have lots of opportunities that will come along. So that's just what I'm saying.
Thank you, the panel. Okay, thank you. We are going to have some food outside and networking opportunity. And yes, so thank you all for joining us at TAROS 2024. And I hope you enjoyed your time here.
Cool, thank you.
Nick, would you like to add anything?
Our panel members give us so many advice. I wish I would have this kind of panel during my PhD or final year or what. So, yeah, thanks again for everyone. Enjoy or may not enjoy the TAROS 2024, and look forward to see you, many of you probably, in 2025. Thank you again. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.